Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about how a 13-year-old boy, a 4-year-old boy. So if you're interested in that, you want to see how this happened, how do other kids, then just keep watching. So this case takes place in Savona, New York. Savona, New York is just a short distance from the Pennsylvania border. It's a very small, quiet town with only like approximately 900 people in it, and everyone knew everyone there. So if you're going to the grocery store, you're going to know your cashier. If you're going to a doctor's appointment, you're going to know the doctor. Everybody knew everybody. It was a very safe town where barely any crime happened, but that would soon change. On the morning of August 2nd, 1993, Doreen Robbie was busy juggling being a mother of two. In the midst of taking care of her new baby, she also had to get her other child, Derek Robbie, off to his recreation program. 4-year-old Derek would go to a recreation program throughout the week, and this program was something to keep him busy during the week because he was so vivacious, playful, and athletic. This program was just down the road, a block away. Doreen said, "He gave me a kiss. I said, I love you. He said, I love you, Mom." And Derek began to walk down the street, clutching his lunch bag. This was the first time Doreen had ever allowed her child to go anywhere by himself. Usually she was always with him, but this time she just had so much going on this morning. She was like, you know what? I'm gonna let Derek go to the park. It's right down the road. So she sent him off. It was only a block away and there were no streets to cross. She was thinking, what's the worst that can happen? The park was on a dead-end street. After Derek left, it began to rain, and Doreen had an awful feeling that something bad was about to happen. She went to the recreation center to make sure Derek was okay, and that's when she found out that Derek never showed up. Doreen called the cops immediately because she's freaking out. I mean, can you even imagine? Can you imagine you're sending your son off and it's the first time you're juggling stuff and you're just like, okay, it's right down the road. I'm just gonna let him go. And then you have this feeling, so you go and check on your child and you find out that no one has seen him and he's never shown up. I can just imagine the guilt she felt. But like I said, once she found out that her child was not there, she called the cops immediately. The whole community came out to search for Derek. Like I mentioned before, this was a very small community and almost everybody knew everybody. So everybody dropped what they were doing and started to search for Derek. After searching for 5 hours, the searchers found Derek's little body in a small patch of woods halfway between the park where he was headed and his home. It appeared as if Derek was lured into the woods and someone had strangled him and battered him with heavy rocks. His shoes had been removed and his lunchbox was torn open. Near his body was a smashed banana from Derek's lunch bag and Kool-Aid that was poured into his wounds. It was a gruesome scene and it was just horrific.
4-year-old Derek Roby's mom also used to think of Savona as a safe, sheltered town until one morning a year ago. She decided to let Derek walk by himself to a day camp just down at the end of this street. There's nothing unusual about that since everybody here knows everybody else. But Derek never made it. Later that day, police found his battered body in a wooded area just yards away from the camp.
After hearing what happened to Derek's body, the town just couldn't believe someone would do something like that. This was their little safe community. Who could possibly have done such a horrific crime? Everyone was trying to figure out who it could be, who could harm this child in this manner, who could do this heinous crime. I mean, I know I keep saying it, but it's just like, this is Savona. Who could do this? But then you have to realize also that Savona was close to US Interstate 86. The locals believed it couldn't be someone in their town. Someone had to come off the highway, come into their community, and do this because their citizens would not do this. Police began their search for the perpetrator and interviewed people in the community to see if anyone knew anything because they needed to solve this quickly. This was a heinous crime to a 4-year-old little boy, and they wanted to solve this crime immediately. And also, like I said, things like this doesn't happen in Savona. So everybody, boots on the ground, they were all ready to go. They spoke to a 13-year-old boy named Eric, and from the information he gave, the police thought that Eric could have seen what happened or he possibly knew who could have done it. He wasn't a suspect because he was a child, and they were certain an adult had to do this to Derek. According to one of the neighbors named Maureen Heskell, Eric had approached her the night of Derek's murder and asked her what happened if it turned out to be a kid who killed Derek. And he also asked her about DNA evidence. Now, this is a strange question for a little boy, I feel like. I mean, I don't think any kids are thinking about this, but anyway, Eric had asked her, and Marlene and Eric's family were thinking, did Eric know something about what's going on here? Does he know what happened to Derek? Or was he threatened to not say anything, to keep quiet? They really felt like Eric knew something about what happened to Derek, and they wanted to get to the bottom of it. Details started to leak about the crime that had happened, and they learned that there was a squashed banana at the scene, and people were thinking maybe this person doesn't like bananas, because why would they randomly just squish a banana? Like, that's kind of weird, right? Yeah. So they were like, the person obviously doesn't like bananas. So 2 days later, Eric's family was questioning him, asking him if he knew anything, because like I said, they were a little suspicious, because why is this 13-year-old boy asking about DNA evidence, and why is he wondering what would happen if a kid did this? So his family was asking him questions because they want to know, do you know something? His family was begging him to tell them what he saw on the day of Derek's murder. Eric said, "I'm really sorry, Mom. I'm really sorry I killed that little boy." Eric's mother, Tammy Smith, said she lost control and continuously asked him why he did it. Eric just said, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know why I did it. And he was just crying while he was saying this. And Tammy was just confused. Like, her son? Are you, like, what? 4 days after the murder, Eric's mother took him to the police department to talk to the authorities. Investigator John Hybish, I think that's his last name, how you pronounce it, I'm not for sure. Sorry, John. But John said that he's looking right at me. He's very upbeat. He's very happy. He likes the fact that he's being talked to. At first, Eric denied seeing Derek, but later changed his story. Eric tells him that he saw Derek across the street from him. By Eric saying that he saw Derek, that's placing him at the crime scene. So clearly, he knows something about what's going on. Eric described what Derek was wearing and told them that he had his lunch bag with him. When the investigators asked him where he had last seen Derek, Eric's voice started cracking and he put his head down. And investigator John said he brings his fists up. His fists were vibrating a little bit, and he goes, "You think I killed him, don't you?" After this, Eric asks to take a break from the questioning, and his father brings him a glass of Kool-Aid, and they continue to question, and Eric grabs the glass of Kool-Aid and throws it on the ground. Now, y'all know why Eric threw that Kool-Aid on the ground, right? I mean, I'm just thinking that maybe he possibly had something to do with it, and seeing that Kool-Aid kind of triggered him. So he threw it on the ground because the Kool-Aid was poured into Derek's wounds. So Eric probably had something to do with this, because why are you being triggered by the Kool-Aid, Eric? Why are you being triggered? The next day, the investigators asked Eric to get on his bike and show him where he was to reenact the scene. Eric took them to the location where he last saw Derek, and while he was doing this, he was being videotaped. The investigators realized that where Eric was, he could not have seen what he's saying that he saw. So they could tell that Eric was lying. The investigators and Eric's family believed that he knew more than what he was telling them. They knew it was more to his story, and he just didn't say it yet. After this, they started questioning him more because, like I said, they knew that he knew more than what he was saying. And then finally, Eric confesses. He tells the authorities that on Tuesdays and Thursdays, he would go to the local recreation center for a summer program. Just like most of the kids in the neighborhood, he was also going to this program too. And on this day, he didn't really want to go because he wanted to go to his mother's doctor's appointment with her, but she said no, and she sent him off to summer camp. He arrived to the recreation center early before it opened, and there were volunteers sitting outside the building at a table. Since the building was closed, Eric became a little frustrated, and he decided to take his anger out on the table that was sitting there, and he began to ram his bike into the table where the volunteers were sitting at. The volunteers tried to correct him and tell him to stop, but he just got even more irritated, and his feelings were festering inside of him at that point. He left on his bike riding back towards his house, and that's when he saw little Derek on his way to his recreation program, happy. He's feeling independent. He's being a big boy. He's walking by himself, and he's giving his mom a break. So Derek is walking to the recreation center, and that's when he runs into Eric. Eric said, "When I first seen him, the first thought I had was, I want to hurt him. I want to take my anger out on him." Eric told Derek to follow him because he knew a shortcut to get to the park, and of course Eric was lying, and he led Derek into the woods. He opened his lunchbox, took out a paper towel, and stuffed it inside of his mouth. He then strangled him until he lost consciousness and repeatedly punched him. Then he used nearby rocks and smashed it on his head over and over again. Afterwards, he undressed him and poured Derek's Kool-Aid that his mother had packed for him in his lunchbox. He took that Kool-Aid and poured it into his wounds. After Derek was dead, Eric did things to him with a tree limb, if you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Eric said that he did this final act because he was frantic and he was scared. He didn't want Derek to tell what happened. He wanted to make sure that Derek wasn't able to say anything because he said that he felt his heart and his heart was still beating. And he wanted to make sure that his heart would stop. So he tried piercing his eyes and his chest with the stick, but it wouldn't go. So his only other thought was to use the stick and to put it inside of him for it to reach his heart and to kill him.
Where he had hit him with his rocks all these times. He said 3. Hit him in the head and there was some blood there. He took the Kool-Aid and he did his hands like this. He said, so he took the Kool-Aid and I poured it into those cuts. Those are his words. I poured it into the cuts. I said, what forever did you do that for? I said, I don't know, I just did.
And y'all remember that smashed banana at the scene? Well, come to find out, Eric hates bananas, so he smashed it. Now remember, someone who hates bananas did that, and Eric hates bananas. It was him. Derek's left sneaker had been removed and was lying near Derek's right hand, and his right sneaker had been removed and was lying near Derek's left hand. It almost looked like his body was kind of staged and it had been posed in that type of position. And I also saw in my research that his body was like put on top of rocks or something like that. I'm not really for sure about that, but it looked like his body was posed. Derek's cause of death was determined to be blunt force trauma to the head with contributing asphyxia. Investigator John said Eric totally enjoyed it and he didn't want it to end. The prosecuting attorney, John Tooney, said he could have simply killed Derek, but he chose not to. Eric continued to deal with Derek's body because he wanted to, because he chose to, and most frighteningly, because he enjoyed it.
I don't know why he did it.
I asked him why he did it. His words almost verbatim were, I don't know, I just saw this kid, this blonde kid, and I wanted to hurt him.
Grandpa! Grandpa!
Yeah.
I was there. I was there when my grandson confessed. And it was terrible.
On August 9, 1993, authorities announced that 13-year-old Eric Smith had been arrested for the murder of Derek Robbie. His arrest would become a national media sensation because people were curious how such a young and innocent-looking boy could commit such a heinous crime. This crime was ridiculous. Only a monster could do something like that. So everyone was very interested to know what happened. How could this happen?
Eric's blowing bubbles on the porch.
I never thought that he could do that. I was with him every day, all day. And that one day that everything happened, I wasn't with him.
The immediate assumption was that Derek's killer was an adult from out of town. Like I said, they were near the highway. They thought someone came into their town and did this. They didn't think it was one of them. No one thought that it could be someone that was right in their backyard. Not only someone in their backyard, But a child, that horrific crime was a sensation in the news, and everyone was engrossed in it because the victim and the perpetrator, they were both young boys. This was a quiet, safe community, and they just weren't expecting anything like that.
You know, when this terrible thing was done, I think everybody, including myself, thought it was an adult. And how could anybody do such a terrible, terrible thing?
I'm just going to pause right here and tell you a little bit about Eric Smith. So Eric was born to Randy Hefner and Tammy Wilson on January 22nd, 1980 in Steuben County, New York. But he grew up in Savona. It was said that his father was in and out of the home when Derek was a child, and when his father was home, his parents would argue a lot. It was clear to Eric that his father favored his sister and that he didn't like him very much. Randy would treat his sister a lot better than Eric. And when his father finally moved out, he would come by and spend time with his sister, which was his father's daughter, but he wouldn't spend time with Eric, and he would leave Eric behind while he took his sister out for a visit. In school, Eric was being bullied by his classmates. Now, when you look at Eric, you can see that he's smaller in stature. He has red hair, he has freckles, thick glasses, and he also had a speech impediment. The kids would bully him about his low-set ears. They would purposely make him trip on the bus. They would yell at him. They would take his belongings. They would slap his glasses off of his face. They would pull his hair. I mean, these kids were just being terrible kids. They were being mean. They were being bullies. They were bullying Eric. And Eric was 13 in the 5th grade because he had failed the 5th grade twice. So he got held back a couple times. He had some learning disabilities. School was just hard for him. He was having a rough time. So you can only imagine how kids saw him. They viewed him as an easy target, and Eric had a few friends. He would spend most of his time with his family or alone. He didn't have any friends. He didn't have anybody to talk to. While all of this was going on, Eric was exhibiting disturbing behaviors. He was banging his head against things, yelling for no reason, punching people, pinching people, smoking, burning objects. We will also come to find out that he was killing and torturing small animals. I mean, we all know the signs of a serial killer. Does this sound like a serial killer to you? It sounds like one to me. It seems like he was on to become Ted Bundy. Some people, like one of his neighbors and his grandparents, would say that Eric was a sweet boy, but other people would say that Eric was not a sweet boy and that he was dangerous. There was one time when Eric was at his friend's house, and while his friend was sleeping, his friend said in his sleep he felt something hot on his nose, and when he woke up, he saw Eric burning a lit cigarette on his nose. So it seems like Eric would show certain people one side and then different people the other side. No one really got to fully see the complete Eric. Eric's mother eventually remarried to Todd Smith, and he adopted Eric. That's why he has his last name. So when I say his father, I'm referring to Ted, who is his stepfather. And Ted was known for being the opposite of Randy. Y'all remember Randy? I just talked about him, his biological father. Now, Ted was supposed to be the opposite, but while he was the opposite, he was loving and supportive, but he could also be intimidating, manipulative, and abusive towards Eric and his siblings. Eric said, "I was walking on eggshells anytime I was around him." So you can only imagine how Eric was feeling in his home. Like I said, they said that he was the opposite of his biological father. He was showing him affection and love, and he cared about him, but at the same time, he was also being abusive to him. So imagine this boy being relentlessly bullied at school, and then he comes home and he has to deal with abuse by his father. This boy cannot catch a break. He was only happy when he got to get away from everything, get away from his school, get away from his home, and go be with his grandparents. At his grandparents' house, he was shown a lot of love, a lot of affection. He loved visiting them because it wasn't like anywhere else that he goes. It was his safe place. It was his happy place. They gave him everything he wanted when he asked for it. He wasn't told no. He just really enjoyed being over there. Okay, so I'm going to bring you guys back to the timeline. A month after he was arrested, a grand jury indicted Eric Smith on second-degree murder charges, and he pled not guilty. He would be charged as an adult, and the prosecution decided to charge him as an adult because of the seriousness of the crime. Usually, serious or violent offenses committed by a juvenile would be charged as an adult. In New York, the youngest age that can be tried as an adult is a 13-year-old. A year after Eric was arrested, his trial began. This trial was televised and everyone was watching because they couldn't believe a child had done something like this. People wanted to hear the details of how a child could do such cruel things. Eric's defense attorney argued that he suffered from a mental disease that can be characterized as a rage disorder and could not be held criminally responsible for Derek's murder. They presented this as an insanity defense, so he was pleading not guilty by reason of insanity. During the trial, it was told to the jury that Eric had speech problems, he was relentlessly bullied in school, he was held back a couple of grades, he had a history of throwing temper tantrums. They wanted the jury to get a picture of what Eric has been through during his childhood. They wanted to show why he could have done the things that he did. Apparently, he asked Ted for help with his anger issues, and Ted told him about a time that he grabbed a bag that was in the barn and he beat on it until he was too tired to do anything else. Soon after, Eric left the house and he came back inside, and you could see that his knuckles were all skinned up and bloody. Eric told him that he went outside and started hitting a tree, and that's why his knuckles were like that. That's how he decided to take his anger out, by going outside and punching a tree. And he got this advice from his father. A defense psychologist diagnosed Eric with intermittent explosive disorder, uncontrollable rage. So you guys know that the defense is there to present Eric in a certain picture. So this psychologist is saying that he wasn't able to control his rage. It was just out of control and he would not be able to tame it. The psychologist said, literally deadly rage and anger. After the episodic rage, the child may appear to be normal. He also said from an early age, Eric had exhibited signs of emotional disturbance and sadism, a product of a family life in which there was a significant amount of violence, verbal and physical. The psychologist had interviewed the Smith family and said that Ted probably hit Eric a lot more than he said he did. He wouldn't admit it. Ted had testified and said that he has anger issues as well. Now remember, Eric said that Ted was abusive. However, Ted describes it as just disciplining his children with the occasional spanking. So he's saying, I wasn't abusing, I was just disciplining. It really didn't go that far, basically. The prosecutors wanted to shut down what the defense was trying to do immediately. They did not want this jury to believe that this was the reason why Eric did what he did. The prosecution wanted the jury to know that Eric knew what he was doing was wrong and he should be held fully responsible for his actions under the law. The prosecution informed the jury that this was a rare disorder that was rarely seen in children Eric's age. So this is not normal, this is not something that happens all the time, and it's not likely that Eric has this disorder. Eric's mother, Tammy, let the jury know that she was taking tridone, I think it's tridone, since she was 5 years old to control her epilepsy. She told them that she continued to take this medication during her pregnancy, and she later found out that this can cause birth defects. Now, while this is true, she also had been taking this medication with her other 2 children. So if this happened to Eric, then it should have happened to his siblings as well. But from what I saw, his siblings did not have the same disorder as him. They were able to control their anger and they didn't have any birth defects. Throughout the trial, Eric didn't show any emotion. He didn't express any remorse for Derek. He was just sitting there, just stoic, kind of. On August 16, 1994, after hours of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. They found Eric Smith guilty of second-degree murder for the killing of Derek Robbie. They also sided with the prosecution and agreed that Eric was not suffering from any extreme mental disorder that controlled his actions at the time of the murder. They didn't believe the defense, they weren't falling for it, and they thought that Eric did this willingly. He knew it was wrong, and he knew what he was doing. He was able to control his actions, but he just decided not to, and he wanted to take his anger out on somebody. Eric's parents, Ted and Tammy, were devastated by the verdict. They were convinced that their child was sick. They thought that he actually did have a mental disorder, and he did not mean to do what he did. Dale and Doreen Robbie cried with relief once they heard the verdict. They just felt like justice was served and Derek was getting his justice. 3 months later, Eric's sentencing was held. The judge gave him a maximum sentence for a juvenile murderer, which was a minimum of 9 years. He would serve his time in a juvenile detention facility until he turned 21. Then once he turned 21, he would be transferred to an adult prison. During his years in a juvenile detention center, he received intensive counseling. Now, I believe that counseling is needed for him. Clearly, he has anger issues. Clearly, there's something going on. Clearly, he had been traumatized from whatever happened to him. So I feel like counseling is needed, and I don't know if that would fix it, but I do think that he does need intensive counseling to work out his issues.
You hear the 9 years to life, and I think back then everybody was focusing on the life side of it.
The Robies, they're serving a life sentence.
When you're sentenced, you could be sentenced with parole or without parole. If parole is an option for you, after you serve a certain amount of time, you are eligible for parole. So then you would have a parole hearing, and parole is when you are released early, but you're still under supervision, and you're under supervision until your ordered sentence is completed. So Eric's first parole hearing came up in 2002, and he was 22 years old at the time. The parole board would deny him because they felt like he had little remorse for the crime he committed, for what he did to Derek. They thought he wasn't sorry enough, so they denied his parole. Over the next coming years, Eric would do multiple interviews while in prison. Eric wrote an apology letter to the Robbie family and read it on television. It said, "I know my actions have caused a terrible loss in the Robbie family, and for that, I am truly sorry. I've tried to think as much as possible about what Derek will never experience: his 16th birthday, Christmas, anytime, owning his own house, graduating, going to college, getting married, his first child. If I could go back in time, I would switch places with Derek and endure all the pain I've caused him. If it meant that he would go on living, I switch places, but I can't." At the end of his statement, Eric says that he cannot bear with the thoughts of walls, razor wire, and steel metal bars for the rest of his life. Well, Eric, you shouldn't have done what you did. Maybe you wouldn't have to bear with the walls and the wires. That's what happens when you commit crimes like this. You have to deal with that for the rest of your life, because you are going to get punished for the rest of your life because you took someone's life. You didn't give them an option. Why should you have an option to not see the walls and the wire? Derek doesn't have an option. He didn't get a choice. You permanently did this for the rest of his life, so I'm not sorry. He also talked about his experiences being bullied as a child, which caused him to shut down his feelings. He believed his emotional anger caused him to take out his rage out on someone who had done nothing to bring on such violence. He wanted people to know his anger at that time wasn't directed towards Eric. It was directed at the type of people who had been teasing him and bullying him his whole life. He said, "If I could switch places with him and take the grave for him to live, I'd do it in a second." So Eric would have parole hearings every 2 years. At one of his parole hearings, he was asked if killing Derek gave him a good feeling, and Eric said that at the moment it did, yes. When asked why he did it, he said, "Because instead of me being hurt, I was hurting someone else." What do you guys think about this? Do you think he's being sincere and honest with the letter, with his feelings, Do you think that he really believes that the bullying and the abuse caused him to do this, and he has this disorder? So do you think like what he is saying is real, or do you think it's all an act and he's just trying to get sympathy and he doesn't want to see the wires and the walls? What do you guys think? Also at this hearing, Eric talks more about what he believes drives children to kill, and he said although each case is different, there is always the underlying fact that the kids who do these unthinkable crimes endure years of abuse, whether at school, at home, or both. I had issues at home, but I'm not going to talk about that. Now remember, every time he has a parole hearing, the Robbies have the right to be present. They also have the chance to speak to the same parole board and tell them how they feel and why Eric shouldn't be released. They have to hear the horrific facts that were done to their son and relive that terror over and over and over again. The frequent hearings took a toll on the Robbies, but they wanted to continue the fight. They wanted justice for their son. So if they have to go through this every 2 years, then so be it, because they're going to fight for their son. During my research, I saw that a psychologist testified that Ted would discipline his children by screaming and spanking them. Eric also said that his sister had left the home to live with her biological father after Ted had sexually touched her twice. So not only was he physically and verbally abusive, apparently he was abusing Eric's sister sexually as well. According to the psychologist, he said that Ted admitted to molesting Eric's older sister, but denied ever touching Eric. So I don't know how true that is. I don't think anybody would just admit that, but that's what I found. So take that with a grain of salt, because I don't know. I just want to give you guys a really quick statistic. So according to the Crimes Against Children Research Center, 28% of U.S. youths ages 14 to 17 have been sexually victimized at least once in their life. Eric said that his father never hurt him in a way that he didn't deserve. He said, if I got in trouble, I got spanked, but he wouldn't just out of the blue start beating any of us. That wasn't him. Even though he said this, years later, he would deny that there was ever any abuse in the home. So I don't know why he keeps going back and forth with this information, but I don't know. So I don't know what really happened, but I think something happened. The following parole hearings were all denied until he made it to his 11th parole hearing. So after having parole hearings for 20 years, on October 7, 2021, the parole board granted Eric's parole based on multiple factors. So here are the factors that they listed. They said, one was Eric's clean disciplinary record. He didn't have anything crazy on there, that he was breaking the laws while he was in prison. Apparently, he was a good inmate. Another reason was his strong release plan, for which included him going to college, plans on working in an electrical installation area or carpentry, something like that. And the third reason was that he had low scores on his risk assessments. Eric said, as to why, after years of reflection, looking back at who I was then and what was going on, I essentially became the bully that I disliked in my life. I was constantly targeted for being weaker, smaller, and I became the bully towards Derek, and he didn't deserve it. He said he gained a perspective and grown beyond the troubled teenager he was at that time. So basically, Eric was tired of being the victim, and he wanted to see what it felt like to be the victimizer. He wanted to cause harm to someone else instead of being the one that harm was caused to.
Unfortunately, at 13, I viewed life in a very dark manner. I couldn't carry the pain and anguish that I felt anymore. I rode my bike around and I seen Derek. I can take my anger out on him. I got him by himself and I strangled him, hit him over the head with a rock numerous times and poured Kool-Aid on him. And I became the bully that I hated in school. I became the individual who dished out pain to someone who didn't deserve it.
Derek's family and the community were clearly not happy with this decision. They feared what he would do once he was released. They didn't want him back in the town. They were like, you're not moving back here to live with your mother and to be around us. No, you don't deserve to live near us. They also felt like he should have gotten more time in prison for his heinous crimes. They didn't feel like he did enough time. A community group called Justice for the Robbies held a peaceful march and a candlelight vigil in remembrance of Derek Robbie. They walked in unity to honor the life of Derek and to support his family. They held signs that said justice has been broken. They believe Eric shouldn't have been granted parole. They wanted him to remain in prison.
We never forget our boy. He was, a wonderful child, and we miss him terribly. I wouldn't wish this on anyone.
Doreen said, I understand why after so many years they decided to give him a chance. And that's fine, for him and his family. He's been released, but in a way, so have we. No more parole. I can get on with our lives. Now the true healing can begin. Dale and Doreen Robbie pushed for state legislation to require violent felony offenders to wait 5 years instead of the current 2 years between parole hearings. Which, yes, 2 years is too soon. 2 years is too soon. So I think 5 years is enough time to reflect and to see if you're able to come back into society again. They did this so the victims of violent crimes wouldn't have to relive the painful memories so frequently. 2 years, hearing what happened to your son every 2 years in a professional manner, that's disheartening.
Saying now, because they went every time that parole board was meeting, they were there front and center.
Vlad, I got to tell you, the heroes, if we can use that word in a story that is obviously so tragic and heartbreaking, are the Robbies. They are remarkable people. And one thing they said was, look, this has been draining for us. Every 2 years, a letter would come at Christmas time saying he's about to be, there's another hearing, and then they would have to relive it and sort of argue again why he should stay. Imagine the upheaval. So as they said to me, and we'll get into tomorrow night, there's this sense of, look, we want this guy to be punished. Obviously, he's given us a life sentence. But in a way, they're free. They're free from having every 2 years to go to this parole hearing and represent their son in a way. And so the fact that they're wrestling that kind of positivity out of this most harrowing of circumstance is remarkably impressive.
Yeah. On February 1st, 2022, 42-year-old Eric was released after spending 28 years in prison for the murder of 4-year-old Derek Robbie. Eric wasn't released immediately after his parole hearing because he had to get his housing in order. He had to get it approved by the parole board. When he was released, he moved to Queens, New York. So he's still in New York. He's just lower. He's not upstate New York anymore. In the city, basically. While he was in prison, he had gotten engaged, and I think he is living with his fiancée in Queens right now. Under the conditions of his parole, he can't leave New York State without permission. He must have regular contact with his parole officer, and he can't associate with others who are known to be engaged in illegal activity. And there are some other restrictions when it comes to parole, but those are the main ones. So even though he is free, he is still being monitored. He's still being watched. He's still being supervised. He's not just out here running free and doing whatever he wants. So that's kind of a plus side to, I guess, him being released. So he is out here, but he's being monitored. So I really want to know what you guys think about this case. I think you kind of got a feeling of how I feel about this. I was trying to be as neutral as possible, but I want to know what you guys think about this case. Should Eric have been released and given a second chance since he was 13 when he committed this crime? He was a baby. He was little. He was little. Or do you think that he shouldn't have been released and he shouldn't have been given a second chance because his crime was so heinous? This is not for people who do heinous crimes. This is for different types of crimes where you get a second chance. What do you guys think? Do you think that people can change? Do you feel like Eric's circumstances is the case for his actions, or was he just born this way? What do you guys think? What do you guys think? Please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye, guys.